the point is that the market will judge you, and it's going to be brutal. And there is no mercy over there. And so it's very important that the product development during the first year of a company or any new product development is going to be very solid and potentially in collaboration with those companies, so this partnership that can provide a real picture of the market, because most of the time we don't, as small companies, we don't understand exactly for example, the minimum products requirements that are fundamental in order to start to operate in the market, but not pretending that much, because it could be also a never-ending story. So just to evaluate the minimum requirements of your product, to be ready to introduce it in the market, and then you will improve your product in the experience, in the real experience, in the real life. And this is the main recommendation from my side, just to be very straightforward.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your perspective. And now we change, we change actor, because, okay, we have the innovations, but innovation must be adopted, and in particular by primary producers. So the next question is for Valentina Materia. What we would like to know is if these bio-based solutions innovation are convenient and attractive for the primary producers, and why they do not decide to adopt such solution, in your view.
Yes, I hope you can hear me well. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank you all also for inviting me to participate to this event. And I'm very glad to bring, as academic, my expertise and experience into this discussion. And indeed, the insights that I would like to share with you today derive not from my expertise as an entrepreneur myself, but from the work that I have developed during the last years in a European Horizon 2020 project called Diver Farming. This project basically aims at analyzing in what way we can transition towards more sustainable agri-food systems by means of crop diversification practices. I lead in this project a work package on value chains analysis and design, and I take therefore the position of the farmers and the perspective of the farmers who need to decide whether to adopt or not crop diversification practices and become more sustainable. So in this case, farmers are either the ones providing startups with the raw material. In one case, for example, they decided to produce flax that then could be used for linen, so to create sustainable clothing. Or they can be the ones becoming entrepreneurs themselves, so adopting, so to say, new crops that could open up, let's say, new markets for them, parallel clearly to their primary produce, or those adopting, for example, new varieties that have been developed in other labs or also other startups in the field. So within this project in particular, we look into what drives and hinders farmers from adopting these crops and these new practices, both at the micro level, so what they feel they want to do or not, and both also at the macro level of the value chains where they operate, or where they possibly have to create value chains depending on the crops that they decide to adopt. In particular, we have looked into 3 different blocks of drivers and barriers for the adoption from the farmers of new practices leading to new markets, possibly. And these are normative, cognitive, and regulative. It means that the normative barriers or drivers cover the values, the norms, the rights, the responsibilities, and the duties of farmers. So what they are supposed to do because they feel it. On the other hand, the cognitive rules result in actors wanting to act, and then regulative rules constrain behavior and indicate, of course, the way to perceive, to follow. And it's about the policy. And it means what they have to do. So in a nutshell, what we have found analyzing this case of farmers who have to decide whether to adopt new sustainable, innovative practices, the most prominent drivers are, on the one hand, financial incentives, and on the other hand, also the relationship between farmers and buyers. So, for example, a positive relationship with a buyer contributes to the adoption of grain legumes in the Netherlands, for example. And in two cases, we have found that the trust that a farmer has in the buyer and also the emotional connection that is in there is really relevant. But clearly, as has been mentioned already from the entrepreneurial perspective, among the most common barriers, there are, for example, vulnerability to climate change. So many farmers decided not to adopt new crops, which could be, for example, used for the sustainable clothing sector, because of the fear that with climate change, they couldn't cope with the production of these new crop. But also there is the competition of the world market and low financial incentives that sometimes, hinder them from adopting something new. In any case, at the bottom line, many of them were not feeling at ease, so uncomfortable in experiment. So they weren't showing any entrepreneurial orientation in that sense.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we will stay again with the next speaker on the same perspective. And so I would like to ask Mrs. Beblek, what are, in your opinion, the existing barriers that discourage primary producers in adopting bio-based solutions? So we already mentioned some of them, but what are they in your perspective?
Yes, good morning to everyone, and thank you for inviting me and having this important topic. I would like to refer to facts we have collected over the last 10 years about barriers, especially related to the farming and primary production sector. And summing it up, it comes down to three main topics, which is the education levels that we have in the primary sector. And if you analyze the different sectors, one can find that just 40% have a basic completed education in the primary sector versus 18% of overall working population in the EU 27. So you can already see there's a huge difference. Then looking at further education, we only have 9% that have graduated from secondary and tertiary education, compared to 34% of the overall working population in the EU. And then, last but not least, but it gives you also a flavor of practical training, is that about 70% of all farm managers have not received educational specific training for their farming job. And I think this is a very significant number. So this is one major stumbling stone. The second one is also related to age and the age distribution amongst the farmers and in the primary sector. 70% of the workforce in the primary sector is above 40 and older. That compares to 57% of the overall working population in the EU. So you can already see there's a tendency towards older people working in the primary sector, and we all know, although we have the paradigm of lifelong learning, the tendency is the older the workforce is, the more difficult it is for them to appreciate new innovative solutions. And last but not least, we have the nature of the business, because farmers as such, especially in the EU 27, are very heterogeneous. So we don't have a one-size-fits-it-all approach if you have an innovative solution. The structural differences across the regions and the EU member states are really very different. For example, in the eastern part of Germany, we mainly have farm sizes and the primary sector sizes of farmers about 1,000 hectares and more. which obviously requires a complete different management approach and a complete different set of skills and mindset. Whilst, for example, in the southern part, in Bavaria, we mainly have farm sizes of around 30 to 50 hectares. So you can see there is a difference. And that also makes it very difficult, and this is my conclusion, to have a business model and to convince with resources farmers to adopt new and innovative solutions, because then you have the small companies, the small startups that basically do not have the workforce to convince all these farmers. So how to approach all these very heterogeneous primary production workforces.
Thank you very much. I mean, now we have really many point of view regarding the primary producers, and now we come back to the startups, to their perspective. So I would like to ask to Massimo Privitera to understand what are the existing barriers for startups in reaching the market, and also in the bio-based sector, but there are many common aspects, I think, no?
Okay. So yeah, we actually we know we live in a fairly complex world. So the barriers that prevent startups from reaching the market and I would like to stay in the market wherever they manage to reach it are manifold. For the sake of this discussion, I will distinguish between general barriers that come from a European startup monitor that we published last year, and some sector-specific barriers that are linked to the bio-based industry sector. So the general challenges that startups face vary in terms of their stage of development, of course. So for instance, at earlier stages, there's a problem linked to product and service development, as it has been already mentioned, and raising capital. And these problems become a bit less important, even though they stay relevant later, when the real problems become sales and customer acquisition and growth of turnover. And then there are some more general challenges. There are, of course, cash flow and liquidity, as it was mentioned in the event concept, the valley of death. So that is really important. Then finding the right partners has already been mentioned, and profitability. And this is really important, I think, also for the bio-based sector, because sometimes some products are actually competing with more traditional products, and the material that is used, for instance, for fossil fuel-based product is really cheap, and now it's cheaper than ever. And though in this specific case nowadays it's so cheap that sometimes it's not even marketable. So okay, this changes a bit the picture. When it comes to more sector-specific barriers, and for this I talked with some stakeholders, with some members, and with some partners, we have to bear in mind that of course this depends on the specific subsector, so also the specific product and the specific national context, as it has been mentioned. But I would say there are four main strengths that now I will lay down, and I can expand on it later maybe. So there are barriers related to demand, and one general problem for the bio-based sector is that there's a mismatch between supply and demand, so that manufacturers wait until there's clear demand before to commercialize technologies, because they don't know exactly how to shape their product, and buyers wait till there's a product on the market before they buy it. So we have to, let's say, intervene in this mismatch between supply and demand. Then there are barriers related to stakeholder perception, and this is really important. It has already been mentioned. So the awareness and the positive perception of the bioeconomy by stakeholders and by the general public, so in the value chain and the general public, is really important to enable market uptake of innovation, while cooperation between different stakeholders is important to enable innovation to better align with societal and business needs. Then there's a fair barrier that is related to investment, because a huge investment is needed to bring innovation to the market, for instance, for demonstration plans, for market outreach activities, and for application testing, as well as for further innovation. So startups, being very small economic actors, face specific challenge when it comes to investment, because added on the top of the fact that they are really small. Also, in this sector, let's say they are acting very risky business. So investors might be a bit wary, let's say, to invest in this kind of startups. And one last barrier is regulatory barriers, and it's a pity that we don't have many policymakers, because I think they, from our perspective, they can really play a huge role. And because regulation may actually play a vital role in order to enable innovation, and sometimes it also hinders innovation. So I can think about the EU Waste Directive, which is really important for many bio-based applications. So that is also really important. So I think these four main barriers, so demand, stakeholder perception, investment, and regulation, are the main important barriers for this specific sector.
Thanks a lot. So we will also take into account the investment dimension, but before I would like to call Mladen Radicic and asking the same question I made to you. Now, what are the main barriers, the existing barriers? And I know that Mladen is involved in Power for Bio, that was a project funded by BBIJU, just to connect this company with industry. Mladen.
Many thanks, Matteo. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, very briefly on this topic. So as you said, I represent Project Empower Bio, which is an initiative aiming to support clusters and SMEs coming from bio-based industries to be more investment ready, so to present themselves better towards future potential investors. And I also represent an organization called Food Scale Hub, which is a Serbian-based association, a cluster, aiming to support startups and SMEs coming from abroad, agri-food, and more particularly food domain. The main barriers that we see our startups, SMEs from our ecosystems are experiencing is actually a non-bankability aspect. So technically speaking, it is not possible for them to obtain funding fast. It is not possible for them to obtain funding in terms of very fast access, meaning that very often they rely to so-called non-conventional funding sources. And of course, especially nowadays in these very difficult times of Corona, many businesses have to shut down, and many businesses have to pivot in order to sustain, in order to be present in the market. So what we experience now is actually the need that is arising in startup and SME ecosystem all around. And this is not only the case in Eastern or Southeastern Europe, it is becoming more and more present across the continent, is actually the fact that companies do need to define their vision more precisely. They do need to define their value proposition more precisely, and they do need to actually present themselves much better, meaning that they have to equip themselves with a very specific skill set where they will be able to actually present to potential investor or to potential groups that will be somehow supporting them. What is their vision? What is their value proposition? And how their contributors can benefit in the end of the day from investing in them, taking joint ventures with them, or being more active in their business. So this is very briefly in a nutshell that we are experiencing in recently.
Thank you very much, Mladen. You talked about the bankability, about the need of funding, and so on. So we have with us Michael Nettersheim from European Circular Bioeconomy Fund, and we would like to ask him what action the ECBF will implement to support innovative startups and spin-offs in the bio-based sector.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so for not really on startups, so seed financings, but more on mature companies. And what we can do that we try to form syndicates with investors. Investors that invest in growth stage companies. And we have a network here in Europe. And those investors can also be family offices, can be corporates, but also other funds, including the European Investment Bank, by the way, and thereby increase the bankability of projects and companies because they have more equity. And this is something we can do, and of course facilitate this also with our investment as such. This is, I think, one of the missions that we have to basically close the late stage financing gap in the bioeconomy. Apart from that, I think what the two preceding speakers mentioned is absolutely true. There are a lot of obstacles along the value chain, bringing a product into the market and also starting in the field, convincing the farmer to grow certain crops. And we also try to support the companies to take a holistic view on that in order to ensure that that the investors really understand the story and see that everything is in place and no further hiccups to be expected from a logistics perspective, for instance. Same is also true for regulatory aspects, etc., etc. So there's a lot that we try to do by bringing in money and also experts and network. And the topics are really complex, and we try to in the bioeconomy, the companies, but we as investors, we also try to establish new value chains or transform existing value chains. That means it's not just the exchange of one topic or one item or one product, but it's more about transforming a whole value chain, and that's really a challenge, and it has its own complexity.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Nettesheim. Now, there is another way to get funded, to raise money, and of course it is represented by crowdfunding. So I would like to ask to Mrs. Connie Weber, if in her perspective, what are the barriers for the development of crowdfunding system within the bio-based sector, with a specific focus on the bio-based sector?
Yes, hello, thank you very much. So I think the main barriers for the bioeconomy are similar to also other sectors in crowdfunding. So I think the general barrier of crowdfunding is the lack of awareness, maybe also the lack of understanding or somehow financial literacy. Crowdfunding is a quite new tool for financing innovation products, SMEs, and it's an alternative tool. So it rised up with the financial crisis. So SMEs were required to find access to funding on different ways. So crowdfunding became more and more popular. We see, especially in countries with a favorable regulatory environment, such as the UK, that crowdfunding can have a really big impact and be very meaningful for SMEs and startups to finance their innovations. Also in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, crowdfunding is growing and has significant numbers. We see really a big barrier for SMEs and startups or the crowdfunding ecosystem as a whole in Eastern Europe. This is mainly due to the regulatory problems. So to understand this better, so crowdfunding is not only not always crowdfunding. So there are different models of crowdfunding. You can differentiate between basically 4 different types. Donation-based is more the charity, which can be quite nice for a small farmer or something like this. Then reward-based crowdfunding is also a non-financial crowdfunding model, which can be really interesting for companies in the bioeconomy sector to start their businesses, because you could, for example, pre-sale your product. So before you start your production, you launch a crowdfunding campaign. either an international one on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or maybe a more local one with your local community and local citizens eventually, where you just pre-sell your product, and with the funds you receive through a crowdfunding campaign, you can start your production. So this could be an interesting non-financial way of crowdfunding. And then we have the financially motivated forms of crowdfunding, such as lending and equity-based crowdfunding, which are extremely interesting for SMEs or startups in the growth or scale-up phase. So for the growth phase, it's nice to get some equity through equity crowdfunding campaigns. It can also be in combination with funds or with business angels. So often business angels put their portfolio companies, suggest them to run a crowdfunding campaign, because it's also a marketing tool which raises awareness along a huge community, which can be very interesting to just create awareness of the product. And the final model is a lending one, which is quite similar to a bank loan, where also very high funds can be raised. And this is just a little bit simpler than a bank loan, because you don't need to have the collaterals, and depending on your risk assessment, the investors get more or less interest rates. But maybe to conclude, I think crowdfunding is an alternative tool that complements existing tools. So it's very nice to use it as equity to get a bank loan, or often a bank loan is not given because they say, okay, we don't know the market, we don't know your customers, we don't know if there is an interest. So you can maybe run a smaller campaign to test the market and to have a market assessment tool. You can minimize the risk through a pre-sales campaign. So there are many small little advantages that, if you use it right, it can be a nice tool to complement with the traditional way of running a business.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So now, last but not least, because Maria Giovanna Vettel represent large industry that are a big partner, in general, for startups and spin-offs, which we would like to understand is if large industry could represent a partner for the scaling up of startups and spin-offs, and in general, how and if large enterprises would collaborate with startups and spin-offs, and what are the main barriers in this cooperation?
All right, so thank you and good morning, everyone. Pity you cannot see my face, but I have a connection which is not allowing me to connect also the video, so you will have to take just my voice. Anyway, that's a good question. Our company, we produce biopolymer. NatureWorks is the largest world producer today of biopolymer called polylactic acid. And for sure, large industries can play, and they have to, in my view, play a role in the scale up of startups. In our experience for my company, I can say that it was very important to work with startups. We had in the past a partnership with a very small startup in California that was able to bring a part of the expertise that allowed us to develop a way to convert methane into lactic acid. Today we use as feedstock to produce our material lactic acid, and the feedstock is corn. As alternative, it's possible to use other kind of feedstock, and methane was a very promising one. And we could develop serious research about it and try also to scale it at industrial level, although we are not there yet, using a partnership with a startup. So it's vital, because the small companies and innovative startups can provide expertise, but they can also push large companies to look into different directions. So I think it's always a win-win situation. Where are the hurdles? I would say that for us, it's difficult to have a clear view on what is happening on the market. And this is why we try to attend events like this one or others around the world, in Europe and in US, basically. We try to work with the university to see where there are the more promising research ongoing, and which can be the more promising startups, and also to find the right way to financing them, because it's not only, we heard today crowdfunding, we also heard the investors, but for large companies, it's always difficult to convince our own shareholders that to invest in a small company is a good thing. So it's not always easy it's easier to cooperate on a specific project than to finance directly a startup. On the other hand, I also had some experience in the agriculture sector, because we use crop as a feedstock. And I can really confirm what I heard before, because also for large companies, it's not easy to convince the farmers to work in a different way. So the communication is going to be very important, it's going to be vital for the work we are doing. Even for us, that we have contracted a number of farmers for our corn, even for us, it's difficult to convince them to change specific agricultural practices to move to more sustainable ones, for instance. So we need the right, let's say, number of incentives to make the bioeconomy progress.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your contribution. And we just said on the fact that you say that sometimes there is the need to have a view of what's happening in the market. There is a good experience that we are doing with the BioBridges project, where in which we created this new format, Bridge to Brand, and we try to connect startups, spin-offs, small companies to big brands, and we experienced. We did it with Procter & Gamble, and now we are doing with Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, and we had the possibility to connect around 100 companies, research center, startups, and spin-offs with them. So this is a good practice, I think. And now we can go to the next questions that are common, and we are using Mentimeter. So Chiara, now I think you will do this, and we can go to the next slide. And you are asked to go to Mentimeter again. And yes, Chiara, please. So will you, the common question is, what action should you implement to ease the adoption of innovative solution? I know that Mladen has to go, and if you would like to give a quick opinion on this, Mladen?
Yes, okay, many thanks, Matteo. Very briefly from my side, because as you said, I have a meeting to attend coming soon. So I'll give you an example of Empower Bio project that we are currently running. So we will aim to create a very comprehensive business support program, aiming for both clusters and SMEs and startups coming from bio-based sector, so they can equip themselves much better with very sophisticated and very in-depth knowledge of how to actually market yourself, how to make yourself more investment ready, and in the end of the day, how to actually play around the innovation. So this means that there must be happening some innovation around those particular entities, startups and SMEs, either created by themselves or created elsewhere. And what we will do, we will actually help them to adopt those solutions that are present everywhere much better. And in the end of the day, once they are adopted, they should be utilized in creating some particular value for those entities, meaning that they should know how to use them, how to make benefit out of them, and last but not the least, how to get, I would say, more funds, more market positioning for sustainability of their business. So when it comes to particular actions, But I would advise to all SMEs and startups out there is actually to follow many interesting initiatives happening across Europe, funded by different Horizon or many other initiatives that could be, I would say, used for, and in many cases, free of charge, for, I would say, learning more about these particular things. And things are now changing nowadays. When it comes to innovation, there are recent articles from distinguished scholars mentioning that we need more application in innovation. So now specialists who are involved in different fields are more welcome on the job markets. So this means that many of the companies have to adopt and have actually to engage those experts covering many fields of engineering, of business, and of many other sectors. So very briefly, follow very interesting initiatives. If you are interested in our offers, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we will do our best to, via our project or many of other initiatives, to support you in doing your business better.
Thank you, Mladen. So are you leaving or are you staying with us still?
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, you are leaving. Okay. So I would like to ask the opinion to Maria Giovanna about this question in particular. Maria Giovanna.
Yes, I already wrote also here on the platform. I think what I saw many times talking in startups is that what is lacking normally is a neat and clear presentation of the business case from the economic point of view. Because to be convinced as companies, I can talk for a large company, to embrace an innovation, we should be convinced of the value of the innovation per se, for sure. But that innovation should also make sense from the economic point of view if we intend to invest on it. And sometimes I think there is too much science and not enough business. So I think it's important to make an effort, and this can be also facilitated by the universities or the investors communities that sometimes help the startups to develop also from this point. So I think it's very important to provide also a view of how the business can take place and in a realistic way. So this is, I would say, more practical point of view.
Yes, so you are talking about something that also Stefano talked about just a few minutes ago. Stefano, what do you think about how to ease the adoption of innovative
solutions? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. My comment was related to the real scale proof of concept. Again, first of all, I totally agree with Maria Giovanna. Most of the time, startup companies are not not much into the business and into the market, but into the business in general. It means that there is a lot of science, a lot of innovation, but then in the mindset of startups, you can find an interesting concept that is basically, I take care of the innovation, and that's why I want to engage a large company or investors in order to just drop the business and market side. And obviously this is not possible because in order to convince these bigger players to be engaged by you, or in any case to create a real partnership, of course you have to prove directly the value proposition, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the business point of view, because nobody is interested to something that is not profitable at the end of the day. And certainly this is the main exercise and also the hardest, I would say, for those small companies that most of the time are very focused on their technical value proposition, and they are pretty much in love with what they are doing, and that's why they are not really assessing and evaluating carefully the opportunity or the constraints in the real world and the market in general.
So we had talked in the first roundtable about the challenges, about the problems, but so now the ideas, what can we do to support, for instance, a primary producer to apply to innovative solutions or to apply to new crops to support then the startups and spin-offs on any way the production of bio-based products. So something we have heard already from Valentina, some ideas, but Valentina, do you want to add something, other ideas or solutions?
Yes, of course, from my perspective and considering what I've been doing in my research, an action that seems to be needed is also an investment in the right incentives, which means in the adoption of that governance mechanism, let's say, that provides more incentive for action. For example, in this big project that I mentioned, also big companies involved, and the way in which this big company, perhaps I can also mention it, is Barilla, because it's a public involvement in this project. The way in which Barilla, for example, is trying to support the farmers into adopting sustainable practices is using a contract. And contract farming has been studied under many different perspectives, economic perspective, also managerial perspective, sociological perspective, as a tool which could possibly provide incentives to farmers. Because at the end of the day, of course, for farmers to adopt an innovative practice, they need to have a positive balance sheet. So this means that they need to be incentivized in taking an action. And what we try to do as a university, collaborating with this company, is also to launch a kind of hypothetical choice experiment, which means providing the farmers with the 3 different options. So what kind of contract you would like to adopt for increasing the probability that you behave more sustainably. So in this way, to create awareness of the need for more sustainability, the need for embracing a different perspective and not just the mainstream conventional agriculture paradigm. Clearly, I bring the expertise from that field. Also, a contract can serve considering the attributes of those contracts, so the price premium that the farmers might need to receive in order to step into something more sustainable, but also what the sustainability means. So for Barilla, there are several different conditions for the wheat to be produced in a sustainable way, also the choice of the variety. So, with the contract, possibly, we try to see whether as a mechanism to incentivize farmers, it works under different conditions.
Okay. Thank you, Valentina.
You're welcome.
What do you think, Anita? What strategies do these primary producers?
Well, I think it's basically very simple, often with the primary producers and with the farmers especially. We often tend to forget that they are also running a business, and business is about surviving and making at least a black zero so that your business can survive long term. And this is something we tend to forget when we talk about innovation in the primary production sector and why they are not adopted and why they are not so much appreciated also. It's very simple because often it is the case that one cannot justify that it is of a benefit for the primary production sector. And this is a major point. And if we want to overcome a lot of these challenges, we need to clearly demonstrate that it is also a business case not only for the startups, but also for the primary producer. And this is one of the main things from our perspective that we should work upon, because we have a lot of innovative ideas, but rarely we have an economic calculation that we can present to the primary production sector, clearly arguing that this is of benefit for them also.
Thank you, Juanita. So I go back to Massimo. Ideas, solutions.
So, well, yeah, I'd like to first to comment on what has been said about startups cooperating with corporates, because, and I will touch a bit of a service placement, because actually we are running several projects on this, and we understand that sometimes they speak different languages, even though they might have similar objectives. One and the other have to be somehow educated on how to interact, and this is really important, because I would say the startups need corporates in order to enter some specific markets, because they might not have shoulders large enough to actually to stay in the market. But more in general, I'd say that going back to the barriers that I mentioned, and I saw that in the comments some of them have also been mentioned. I'd say that when it comes to demand, then we have to understand if we're talking about business to business or business to consumer, because that makes some difference. But there are some activities that, for instance, governments can put into place, and these are called lead market initiatives. And this would involve, for instance, involving users through public-private partnership, or boosting demands through public procurements. And there we have a problem that sometimes bio-based public procurements is not actually existent in many national contexts. And then, as it has been mentioned in one of the comments, we need to improve awareness. So we go back to stakeholder perception, and there's some talks about eco-label in the bio-based industry, but I'm not an expert, so one might actually think that is not a good idea. But for instance, other programs like in the US with the BioPreferred program that actually boost the awareness of the importance of this new kind of products. And then for barriers related to investment, there has to be an effort in de-risking the investment, because the problem is that since, for instance, for some application, the primary product is really volatile, and it's a huge share of the final price, some private investors might not actually be willing to take this risk, and some people in the panel actually might agree or disprove me on this, but there might be some private partnership, and someone mentioned the European Investment Bank, or the European Investment Bank should invest itself directly in some specific solution. So there's a host of different approaches that can be taken from different actors. I saw, for instance, in the logo of your project that you have the quadruple helix. So each of those actors in the helix can actually bring something to the table and approach the problem, which is very complex from different perspectives. So, I mean, it's very hard to find a silver bullet. It depends on the problem, it depends on the context, but there's a lot to be done at the same time in parallel, let's say.
Thank you, Massimo. So, Michael, I come back to you. So how can we, what can we do? The supportive environment, what can do to ease the access to the fund, for instance? So what is missing maybe? Maybe there is something that we are not doing. Do you have suggestions, Michael?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think right now I would say we do a lot of things, and as mentioned earlier, it's really a complex topic overall, so there are many dimensions to be considered. And there's also, like others said, there's no blueprint. It's case by case, and you need to develop the individual case, and each of them has differently pronounced challenges, I would say. But I don't think we are missing out on anything right now. Actually, when it comes to products that you bring into the market, so if you have B2C products, it's really about how to probably communicate also to the public and to the consumer why they should buy this, also from a sustainability perspective, and that's really a challenge, right? Because not everybody holds a PhD in that field or as a scientist. Most of the consumers, if you want to broaden that and not only address the ones that are highly educated, they need to understand what the benefit is, and that's one of the key challenges, I think. If they would understand this, then you would have more traction in the market. If they don't understand this, the question is whether you need to create either incentives for bio-based product, as was mentioned before, or, for instance, if you punish a fossil-based product in order to foster sustainability. And in that whole concept, you need to also define what is sustainability and how comprehensive is the sustainability issue. There's maybe one thing here that needs to be addressed, and I think also the European Union and Commission is working on this, is the clear definition of sustainability, right? Some people say it's sustainable, but they just take a look at few steps in the value chain and ignore others, and that's then not comprehensive. So if you would take a holistic view, things may not be really sustainable. But as long as this is not clearly defined, that's a challenge also for consumers, because the consumers go into the supermarket, they buy something, and then they learn, okay, this is sustainable, but then they read the newspaper and that tells them it's not sustainable because it ignores this and that. So that's something that's probably one of the key challenges and things that could be addressed. But the companies, I think, and also the investors, they know about all these issues, and most of the companies are working on this. Sometimes there's a limitation of resources because the companies are not financed well enough in order to work on all items in parallel to the best. But in principle, there's awareness for all of these points. That's my conclusion from the discussions we have with the companies and also with the investors.
Just a clarification, sorry, Michael, but the fund is funding the bioeconomy in general, so bioeconomy, not just the bio-based economy, the bio-based solutions, but bioeconomy in general. To be clear on this.
Yeah, it's I was just referring to probably the more B2C cases in that example, but there's of course a lot of business in the B2B space, transforming the transition from fossil-based to bio-based materials. But there again, the question really is how you can communicate and transfer sustainability, right? And how to understand this. Also in B2B, sometimes when you look at I would say intermediate products that a company, an innovative company sells, so new product, and claim it's from a sustainability point better, then the question is what has been taken a look at. So is it the whole value chain? Is it just one step in the value chain or a few? So also for B2B, this applies as well, and probably even more, because in B2B, the challenge is less problematic because the business partners are most of the time better educated than the individual consumer is.
For sure. So I would like to ask Connie if we can, how can the supportive environment support these new businesses? How is the crowdfunding, as you said, one of the solutions for sure? How can we maybe incentivize this instrument?
I think that generally in Europe, it's difficult to be an entrepreneur and to start an innovative company. So I think this is a task of policy to lower the and to make it easier for startups, entrepreneurs, or also small SMEs to really bring their product to the market. So I think if we look at the statistics, how many researchers we have here in Europe, and then how many successful companies we have in this field, there is a big gap compared to other industries such as the US or China, and also the European Commission is seeing this and pushing risk investments and for startups and SMEs. So I think it's a little bit of investment, but we need to support better the small companies with money to risk some things, to grow, to scale, and to bring their innovations to the market. And then maybe also policy. I completely agree with what Michael said, that we need more transparency about what is really sustainability and who is providing good products or not. I think especially the big players in the market, it's difficult for small innovations to compete against it because it's so difficult. And then if you look at the details, they are not caring about anything, and this should be from policy side, either with incentives for the small or with, as someone else mentioned, I think it was Massimo, I don't know, to pay something for not providing sustainable products. These could be options, but I think there is a role for policy to support this.
Thank you, Connie. So I see several points also from the public, from the participants to the meeting. I don't know if you have
yes,
analyzed both Matteo and also Daniele.
The comments from the public that resound more are the question: what action should you implement please? Adoption of innovative solution are mainly concentrated on the education and the raise of awareness of the public. Especially was really interesting the one that underlines stress of the importance of to raise the market awareness to raise the market. Then we have the public awareness is the one of the most aspects that has been stressed. Then of course we have focus also on the incentives to the bioproducts and also to the support and implementation of a demo site or a startup that can develop this kind of products. Then we have other input like the scale-up center and development of business models, collaboration. Yeah, I suppose that the collaboration must be considered as collaboration from a different sector and with the policymakers also that can incentives the policies of the bioeconomy sector. And then I think that more or less financial incentives for startups and entrepreneurship. Well, I think that more or less I have highlighted all the comments.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, if again there is a comment that Justin Casimir wrote in the Q&A that is about more or less it's a problem, no, emerging into collaboration between startups. I mean, with between companies and farmers. He says to include farmers, we should have propositions with enough economic benefits and low risks. Farmers are dealing daily with risks, weather, world market, and do not necessarily want to add new risks to their portfolio. So this is a comment that I would like to highlight. It was written into Quinte box.
Thank you, Matteo.
I think, no, Amir, you highlighted more or less everything. I'm a little bit surprised that financial support wasn't the first request from participants. But yeah, you say awareness and so on. So it's fine from my side. I think we can go to the next question.
Next, yes, if I can say, BioVoices is really working a lot about awareness, less on education, but when the BioVoices will close, it was a very amazing adventure with very collaborative and supportive partners that have worked a lot with years, but we will continue our adventure together with the new project funded by Horizon 2020, Transition to Bio. So I like to stress and underline this name because from the beginning of the next year, so 2021, we will continue to work to support bioeconomy, bio-based economy, thanks to Transition to Bio. So I go to the next question, if I may. Okay. So, last question for our roundtable: how to improve the supporting environment? Which services? So this is something that we have already asked during the previous question, because really probably some services, something is missing for startups and spin-offs in particular. So maybe maybe there could be other ideas from you. Maria Giovanna, what do you think? What is missing yet? What can we do? A project like BioVoices or for project in general, support action from the Commission, or also from other national authorities. So what is missing? What can be done to really stress and improve the innovation and so give a new impact to, especially to big enterprises, large industries?
I wish to be able to give you an answer on this point, because frankly, it's difficult. And this is what I see today, is that the many projects that I see also financed by the European Commission and the European Union, is the usual structure. You have the consortium, you develop the project, you put the findings online, and sometimes startups and innovative companies grow just for the purpose to develop this specific project. So the very beginning, the very starting phase is there, and then you have the dissemination stage, so there are the websites and everything. I think this is then we sort of lose it. It's not coming to our attention, and I bet it doesn't come to the attention to the policymakers either. So the work that BioVoices in this does is very good, because it is already starting to create the link. But I think we need to be more, I don't know, I would be more aggressive on a sort of an open innovation platform, because that is the sort of idea. So companies need to be aware of, they need to all to participate to these kind of platforms to understand what there is around that can be really useful for us. I'm sure that there are a number of projects which grow with a specific idea that is an innovative idea, and it just doesn't move forward because of lack of investment. I agree with you, with what you said before, that you didn't see investment as first money, as a first voice. But sometimes we don't know what is around. There is a disconnection between what the companies do and really what the European funded projects move forward. So I really don't have a clear solution. We need more interaction, that's for sure.
Yes, thank you, Maria Giovanna. So, BioVoice is also created already 2 years ago. The European Bioeconomy Network is the network of all the combination of protection funded by Grant 2020, also the BPI joint undertaking, the bio-based industry joint undertaking, funded from industries, so from the PIC, and by the European Commission through Horizon 2020. This network today is counting more than 70 projects and initiatives, all related to the communication, awareness, education on bioeconomy, on bio-based economy. And so the work of this network is really to maximize the impact of the activities, of the results, outcomes of the project. But a lot has to be done for sure. You are right, Joanna. This network is important also for the Commission, because it is cited now in the updated bioeconomy strategy of the 2018. It's part of the one of the networks that the Commission is emphasizing and incentivizing now, but something for sure for strengthening collaboration and enhancing the impact of the project. So the collaboration is important, and especially to give easy access to all the information. So this is something that we will work on. May I ask also to Massimo some other inputs for us?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a lot to be done. And of course, again, it depends from which perspective. Let's say, because someone mentioned administrative aspects, someone mentioned business aspects. Let's say that on the administrative side, we are now working with the European Commission on something that is called Startup Nation Standards. So a set of actions that all member states should put in place in order to make it easier for startups to be founded and to thrive in the European Union. And this would involve access to talent, access to finance, administrative procedures made easier, and so on and so forth. Then from our perspective, I think that from the community perspective, there should be a set of services put in place that we might divide in business-related services and technical services. A business-related service might be like mentoring startups on how to interact with corporates, leaders, and investors. Improve financial literacy, as it was mentioned before, as really important for some specific startups. Teaching startups how to pitch their idea to corporates, for instance, because again, it might be very well, let's say, packaged on a scientific level, but they might not be convincing because the economics are there, but they are not able to explain how, what, and so on and so forth. Yeah, okay. Then on a technical point of view, it was mentioned several times that there should be some activities that would make, let's say, easier for first steps, like for instance, application testing or providing machinery and factories for bioprocess scale up, and all these kind of first steps that the startups couldn't make on its own because it would be too costly. So there should be a sort of a consortium that would provide these kind of services, also services to identify relevant regulations for that specific product, which is something that a startup would never be able to do on its own. Life cycle assessment, because if we keep talking about awareness, and then I was mentioning eco-label, for instance, for the eco-label to be applicable to bio-based products, there should be a life cycle assessment that a startup is not able to do on its own. social acceptance trainings for awareness. So there's a host of services that actually could be put in place by the different actors that actually create the whole domain of bio-based industry.
Okay, thank you, Massimo. So there is a lot of things to do still. What do you think, Stefano?
Okay, thanks. Well, it's very good to add something else to the long list of the actions that we already have about this. From my perspective and experience, I would like to add one point, maybe to stress it a little bit more, which is the opportunity of getting coaching and mentoring, real coaching. We as SME, we benefit from the SME instrument phase 2, and we are still in our way. The project is still active, and from this support and from this horizon, basically we got a very nice support also in terms of coaching, which is something that is fundamental in the old SME instrument program, and honestly, it has been quite surprising from my point of view, because it opened some interesting windows in our brains, but also in the company. And of course, we made a certain choice for our coaching, looking for those expertise and those high profiles already in the market, with a significant experience in the market. And that was a really tangible benefit that we got from the program, because basically you have your home, in your office and your facility with your team, someone that is coming from a serious experience, and most probably working also with big companies. So introducing a point of view and concepts that are not so common to find in small companies or startups. So coaching is really something that is a kind of bridge in terms of know-how, and well, this is my final input, I would say.
Thank you, Stefano. So I see here among some answer on the Mentimeter, the co-creation with the primary producers could be an answer for technology transfer, for creation of new businesses. What do you think, Anita? The co-creation are available primary producers?
Chiara, it's really hard to understand what you said because there are some issues in the microphone. Can you repeat?
Okay. So my question was to Anita, and I was reading here in the meeting. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Better.
Better, but not very well. I don't know what to do.
Now it's fine. If you talk
okay.
this way, close to the laptop, it's fine.
To the laptop, okay. So my question was to Anita. I was reading here on the answers of the Mentimeter from the participants. Could create with primary producer. Could be an option, a good option for technology transfer, for creation of new business, a new business model. The co-creation with the primary producer are available then.
Yes, I think this is a very good approach, because we already have mentioned during our discussion that trust is one of the main issues for farmers. And how do you create trust? During a process where primary producers and startups and scientists can develop together and can also interact together. Hence, I would also suggest that the general format of EIP Agri, for example, is a good approach how to foster this co-creation on a permanent basis. And I think this is very important, that this is not just a one-off. You meet once and then you all disappear again, but this needs to be an ongoing process over a couple of months, at least, ideally a couple of years. And then you create a community with the farmers that you can always refer to, going back with your new ideas or test and validate. And I think this would be a good step forward.
Thank you, Anita. Valentina, would you like to add something on this?
Yes, I completely agree with Anita on this statement, because it comes also from my experience that, for example, community of practices or other tools like the operational groups, which have been defined by the European Commission already as a tool to create a table where different actors participate, is one of the ways to make the voice of the farmers being heard. Because what I mentioned also through my research, what we identified was also a request from farmers in particular to be heard. Because farmers sometimes feel that they are the recipient of many policy indications which come like parachuted on them, but they complain that sometimes they are not heard. So they don't listen to their voice. So possibly research has already produced results that farmers might need, because those farmers have those needs, but they don't know each other. So research hasn't gone to the practice. So as a service that could help, on the one hand, the farmers solve an issue that they concretely have on their field, for example. On the other hand, researchers to provide the knowledge that they have produced. And with all the actors that can, as brokers, combine the two worlds, so innovation from a research perspective or technology perspective, so the industry and the farmers, this is needed. So I think absolutely co-creation is what I would suggest as a way to embrace everyone, embrace everybody's needs and voices, to understand at least how to set the foundation of a collaboration. And there are already initiatives. So there are also these operational groups, which in many countries in Europe have been launched. And I think those are a successful way of putting around the table different actors from the university, the ministry, the industry, the services, and service providers, farmers. But I'm not sure how much is known about that. This is the only problem. So to disseminate also the good practices and the reasons for failure of many of these activities.
Thank you, Valentina. Again, from here, from the Mentimeter, I see business development. Startups are very product focused, but lack a clear strategy what, how, why to be able to attract investment. So this is something that I think we have heard from the speakers, also in the previous roundtables. What do you think, Michael? I think that, yes, startups are really focused, but the strategy is not clear, so it's difficult to talk with investors. What do you think, Michael? How can we answer to this comment?
Actually, I had hard times understanding your question, to be honest, for the bad line. Could you just please repeat?
Okay, sorry. I was reading more or less this comment from the Mentimeter. Business development. Startups are very product focused, but lack a clear strategy, what, how, why to be able to attract investment. Do you agree on this?
It's really tough, so I have to extrapolate a little what you said. I hope that it matches your question somehow. I think, as mentioned before, there's a lot of awareness also, I think, among the companies we take a look at. So probably not the early stage startups where there's a scientist. And when you look at the value chains and also the regulatory aspects and even also the logistics and supply chain aspects, I think there's a good awareness among the startups. Of course, it can always be improved in that sense, but when it comes again to the consumer, there needs to be be more education, and maybe also to include people there. But I don't know how this should work, to be honest.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Connie, do you want to add something?
Well, I think also that I cannot add much. So most of the aspects I would have said have already been said. So I think it's important to bring different parties together to coach people and to mentor people. I personally made good experiences with these European Commission acceleration programs. So there are these InnoSub programs. We are at ECN. We are currently running a cascading funding for blockchain startups, which is quite interesting. So they get 30,000 euros over 10 months. They get coaching, they get boot camps where they talk to each other and can learn from each other, where experts and investors join. So I like very much these programs. I think they are bringing a little bit together of what has been said, to bring the startups together with the customers, to involve research and experienced companies. So this is a nice best practice, I think. And I think it's the mixture. So companies need funding, so it's about the money. They need, of course, the customers. We need to be aware of them, which also costs because there is a marketing investment behind. And of course, then the interaction with the customer is important to develop products that are really needed. And coaching can be a way of addressing market needs and financing needs in a good way. So yeah, I just underline what all the other experts have already said.
Thank you, Connie. So, Matteo, do you want to add something?
Well, I would like to stress something that was said by both Valentina Materia and also Maria Giovanna Vetere, the fact that there are several initiatives and that they are so many cases not really known, or in some cases there are some initiatives that is not working well everywhere. I mean, operational groups were mentioned, but I remember that at the end of, at the beginning of 2018, for instance, in many regions in Italy, they were not already activated. So this is something really important. I mean, another thing that could be maybe that I would like to point it out maybe is that in many cases there could be a better support also from the regional level. And for instance, I think to structural funds, no, in many cases they could be useful for increasing the adoption of this solution in primary producers, in my opinion. And this is a sort of question that I would like to make to the speakers, and in particular to Valentina Materia and Anita Beblek, if structural funds could boost the adoption of this innovation. And then I completely agree with what the other speakers say about the coaching, the mentoring, that is really important. And I'm glad that Stefano explained the benefits that he had from the SME instrument, from the coaching provided by the SME instrument. So this question to the speakers, how the structural fund could help to boost to adopt the innovative solution, bio-based innovative solution.
Yeah, shall I?
Sì, Valentina.
point, which in the past has been also a crucial issue when it comes to research and innovation in agriculture in particular, because we know that if we consider, for example, the Italian case, with the division in many regions, with each region having also the authority to decide how to manage all these funds, in the end, we experienced the issue of a lack of coordination. So structural funds are a good solution in the moment in which there is a coordination behind that also imposes, so to say, some rules of the game. So how these funds can be indeed managed and administered at the regional level. Because in any case, we need to think of clearly a national level, and these funds can come, for example, from the national government, but from the European government, and so on. So structural funds can be a solution in the moment in which there is a sustainable perspective on it, in the sense that if they stop suddenly, farmers have already complained that whenever there are subsidies, that's good, but when they stop, then clearly that's an issue. So I think structural funds also, let's say, for having structural funds, still there has to be a change, possibly also on the awareness of why these funds should be structured, so should be provided for a certain aim, and I'm not sure how much this is perceived at all the levels. So not just the company level, but also indeed at the primary producers level and the ministry level. And so I think it's just in a nutshell, what I think is it can be a solution as long as there is coordination and a way to manage those funds, which is in line with the aims.
Should I continue?
Please, Anita, yes.
Yes. I think what is very important to remember that these structural funds do only support innovation as long as they are not too complicated in terms of management and operations. And I think this is something we need to consider. Yes, I think they could be supportive and they could help and foster innovation and also co-creation amongst different groups. But one has to look at the proceedings and the level of management skills that are required to administer these projects. And there it would be really beneficial if simplifying them is on the agenda of national funding agencies.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your reply. Chiara, I don't know if you have other questions or other consideration to add.
No, I don't think so. So maybe we can go to the conclusion. So, Matteo, do you want to share our next events?
Yes, I'll try. I have some works close to me. I don't know if you heard the noise that they're doing. Okay, it's perfect. So yes, we are doing other initiatives within the BioVoices project. The next one is about the plastic. It will be done by ICLEI, our partner ICLEI. So, and it will take place on Friday. You can register on the link I mean, all these workshops are published in our collaboration platform, on our BioVoices collaboration platform. Then there is another event that is on policies, regulation, R&I funding programs and investment to boost bioeconomy in Italy. So it will be based on an action plan that was designed by an interministerial by a working group made at a ministerial level. So we will discuss it during the Buy Green Forum, and it is organized by APRE. this particular event. Then there will be a European event related to the wood value chain, the wool value chain, and in order to understand what are the regulatory action to boost the sector. So this is a follow-up of a national event, and it is managed by FWA, another partner of BioVoices. Then the last workshop, I mean, we will do online on 28th of October, and it is focused on food packaging, so bioplastic and bio-based products for food packaging, and this is a really hot topic now. So in the last slide, I would just remark, of course, that everything will be published, including the recording of the today event. Everything will be published on our collaborative platform. Then we launched now, I mean, some months ago, a survey aimed at assessing the awareness of people on bioeconomy, and in particular their purchase habits. So at the moment we received around 1,000 replies, and we ask you to, I mean, fill it and to share it among your contacts. So more or less it's everything. I see. Just give me a second to see if there is something in the chat in Q&A, but nothing. So Chiara, if you would like to conclude.
Yes, I would like to thank the speakers. I think that the discussion was really good, and we have heard many information and suggestions. We will collect all this information in the policy briefs that we are preparing, and that we will give to the European Commission by the end of the project. I don't know if at the beginning of the new year it will be possible to organize physical event, but in any case we will organize a final event together with the Commission in order to emphasize all these recommendations that are coming from several workshops that we have organized thanks to BioVoices. So thanks also to the participants and to my team. So see you on our next event and in our platform. Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.